All right, so hello everyone. Today we are going over the study guide 1. Study guide 1 is on the firm level analysis, on the country level analysis. So it's all about geographical differences. PESTLE is our main framework. We have, if we go over the structure that we can see in the headings, we have 7 weeks. In the study guide 1. So all the bullet points here are what we are going to be tested on. So I will go over each one of them. Feel free to take notes. So week 1, we talk about globalization as the beginning or introductory chapter. In this chapter, I want to emphasize on 4 points. The first one is globalization is emphasizing on something that's moving away from self-contained economy, but more an interdependent economy. If we can highlight the keywords, it's interdependent rather than independent. In the point 2, I want to emphasize on the size of the firm that participates in globalization. Instead of saying big multinational firm as the main force of globalization, we should realize that more than 90% of the firms that in globalization, meaning in exporting, FDI, licensing, franchising, those 90% of these firms are small and medium enterprise. And their ratio has been keep climbing over the years. So more and more small and medium enterprise participate in globalization. And the third bullet point here is what is the key driving force of globalization. The key driving forces are world economic development, meaning the places of increase in GDP, the places of increase in GDP per capita, our productivity have increased, and this productivity increase, possibly it's a virtuous cycle between globalization and world economy development. And the second term is technology change. So technology change is changing to a positive side, meaning we have more advanced communication technology, more advanced transportation technology. And number 3 is supranational institutions. Supranational institutions emphasize on WTO, United Nations, and the rules that's helping countries to get favorable treatments for tariffs, and also decrease on the trade barriers. That's what a supranational institution means. There's also lower down barriers, not just for trade, but also for foreign direct investment. So overall, we see more and more investment agreement, international investment agreement, IIA. More and more of them are established at the bilateral level and also at the multilateral level. This supranational institution can also include the trade bloc that we have mentioned, the NAFTA, Mercosur Indian Community, European Union. Those are all also counted institutions. And the last but not least, for the chapter of globalization, what are the consequence impact of global production? So these ones we can start from slide 20 on the first week. So this impact are the consequences of impact are that how does it affect the world of rich and poor? Globalization has enlarged the gap of the rich and the poor. So that's one of the dilemmas we have talked about. We also talk about the impact in terms of globalization and further advanced technology, not necessarily development, but dispersion. So the more locations we're able to enjoy technology fruits. This outcomes also include countries' national sovereignty getting affected. The countries previously have full independence on its own for political decisions, but later on, when multinational firms come, who contribute a lot of tax money, and then will further reroute the countries, derail the countries for its political arguments. Political arguments in terms of their standpoint for diplomatic relationships, their political standpoint for who might be their allies, what are national favorable treatments for firms locally or internationally. So those are the major impacts, but if we want to read further, starting from slide 20 of chapter 1, that they have more, and we have answered question in weekly assignment 1 on this too. In week 2, the PESTEL analysis. So PESTEL is our leading framework for the country level analysis. So first we want to know what PESTEL stands for. P stands for political, E stands for economic, S stands for social, T stands for technological, L stands for legal. The last E could be ethical or environmental, but essentially it means the corporate social responsibility. These factors are interconnected. There's a couple meanings in this. First, one of the elements that we analyze can be both economic or social or anyone that's combined. So one item, for example, tax law, it could be a law, it is a law, and at the same time, it's also an economic dimension. On the other side, it also means the different factors in PESTEL, they are interdependent to each other. The political events can affect economic situation. The legal circumstances of a country will affect the social welfare. The environmental outcomes can be determined by economic activities. So those what we mean by they are interconnected. They are not independent from each other. One change in one of the PESTEL factors can lead to other factors in PESTEL also change. And number 3 is what I have been emphasizing on the relationship between SWOT analysis and PESTEL. So in SWOT analysis, we have S&W, which is the internal advantages or disadvantages of the units. This cannot apply to PESTEL because PESTEL only applies external factors. And which ones are the external factors in SWOT? They are opportunities and threats. What factors in PESTEL is the most important if we want to tell a multinational firm when they enter a host country? So most of you probably have already done the country level analysis for your term project and know this part is a trick question. So you always want to answer it depends. And then in the following scenario, I will argue why it depends. It depends on what. And then no single one PESTEL factor that's more important than others. It's always case by case, depending on what the firm will do in the host country. So in one of the scenarios that we say it would depend on the FDI motive of this firm. It depends on what the firm is doing in this host country. If the country is becoming a natural resource event for this firm, then we'll say environmental factors more important. It's the leading factor for the firm to consider. If the firm are going there to seek technology, then of course the knowledge availability, the legal aspect, the intellectual property protection is the most important. So we want to depend on this, on what is the firm actually doing, on what the industry of the firm, what is the firm's subsidiary activities in the host country. That's what the firm is depending on to determine which factor of the host country matters more to them. So don't give a single answer to fix it to either economic must be more important. It's not necessarily the case. So I also listed in week 2, so for the examples, what would be efficiency seeking FDI? What is that more important? What would be a technology seeking FDI? What would that be more important? If we can record that in our term project, we want to write about not every single PESTEL factor. And that kind of infers that there's some factors important to your firm, to your host country, to your company entering this particular host country for the industry of your firm. So this is how we think about this question here. In week 3, we have gone through political economy of the PESTEL factor. So what are the 3 factors that we can use to decompose political economy? So there are 3 legs in talking about political economy. These 3 legs are political system, economic system, and legal system. The political system is a system how governance is organized in the nation. And political systems can be four different types. They can be social democratic communism, democratic capitalism, and totalitarian capitalism. Legal systems there are three types. There's theocratic laws, there is civil laws, there's common law. We focus on civil law and common law, the comparison. There's economic system as well. Economic system matches with the political system. The communism regimes usually have command economy. So command economy is economic system that matches the political system, being in communism. For capitalism regimes, they usually adopt market economy. And the feature in market economy is supply and demand is determined by the price. Let me reframe this. All right. So there is the supply and demand, which is the condition. And supply and demand determines the quantity and also the price. All right. So I want to correct myself. The supply and demand determines the price and quantity. What political system can a country be under when the command economy? A political system usually is communism if the country are using command economy. Under which legal system contracts tend to be longer and why? Under the legal system of common law, the contract tend to be longer. They need to define the scenarios instead of in the code system, which is civil law, then the contract tend to be shorter. Here, I also have a relationship between property rights and corruption. So corruption is a type of property rights violation. Corruption is usually done in the public sector. So the public sector property violation. But corruption, not all the countries have defined it as illegal. So some of the countries have distorted. So I want to put out a note here that some of the public sector property violations can even be legal. And these legal ones include excessive taxation, licensing fees, and bribery and corruption is probably on the next level in terms of less legitimate. But not all the countries have defined the corruption or bribery as illegal. So it's kind of in the gray zone. So here, I have mentioned it once, but I probably want to repeat it a little bit here, is usually property rights violations are illegal, but those ones are usually referring to private behavior, so theft, robbery. Those are for sure illegal. Almost all the countries in the world would define this as illegal, but property rights violation at the public sector can be not included in the law to define it legal or illegal. In some of the circumstances, property rights violation in the public sector can be legal. It's written down in the law that you need to pay this amount of taxation. So to some extent, if taxation is above some crazy amount, then this is property rights violation, but it can be legal. This is what I want to emphasize on here. And this kind of brings to the dilemma of government, because governments are in power, they can use their power to violate property rights. And this becomes a dilemma for people to discuss whether if from somebody in power, you can actually violate the general public's property rights. In week 4, we have talked about the social dimension of a PESTLE, which is a culture. Culture is one type of social dimension, and culture refers to a system and value of norms that shared among a group of people. And here, the keyword, number one keyword is people. So culture is a mankind society phenomenon. And the second is the word group, which means culture is a shared value or norms among the common beliefs of people. culture cannot be a single individual thing. So one person cannot form a culture. So this confusion here usually comes from culture is measured. Culture studies is done at the individual level. In several individuals, what do you think, what do you believe in certain question items? But we do want to know that the survey from individuals, they never calculated from the individual, they always aggregated data based on a group of people. So again, the keyword is group and people. There are a couple of forms of culture that we can observe. The bigger idea is that culture is like an iceberg. The majority of the belief system, the norms, are hidden under the water that we don't see. So it would be something similar to what I have mentioned, the relationship between value and price. Value is something that you don't see. Same here. People's value is also something that we even though we think that we see it, it's difficult to describe. But there are a couple of different aspects that reflect culture will be something that's above the surface of the water. These are religion, education, language, and social structure. The majority of the cultural values are hidden underneath the water as iceberg, which makes culture studies very complex. And it's probably making it a little bit problematic to measure it. However, in the management studies, measuring culture has generated concrete benefits that allow the manager to infer, also put into practice in the human HR aspect. So these questions in terms of religion and pro-business attitude, I purposefully deleted in the exam because I know this can cause more debates. But when we go to class, I did mention at least for philosophy, people believe that Christian and Islam are pro-business attitude. So there's a couple of reasons I have removed this question, because religion can also evolve in terms of their beliefs. One of the things that there's probably nothing to do with the exam. So one of the things I keep mentioning is about the LGBT, the inclusiveness about LGBT in the religion is probably will change over time. So as the attitudes towards business. All right, so I probably can unhighlight this part to not flag you so much. On the Hofstede work, Hofstede is the first management scholar that started to measure culture with a numeric number. As we're saying, culture is a complex study. Majority of culture are hidden underneath the water. But Hofstede tried to measure this part underneath the water with question items and with numbers that reflect each individual's beliefs. So Hofstede's work are criticized for several reasons. So this criticism is not because we don't like Hofstede. The criticism is because we like Hofstede too much, and we read his work in greater detail, then we try to build on Hofstede's work for culture. So these criticisms some of the criticisms have already been addressed, some of them are not. The first one is Hofstede is under the assumption of one-on-one relationship between culture and the nation state. So we see the data always at a country level. So which assumes that each country within this country geographical boundary, everybody holds on average same value. But this is not true. We know this is not true for colonization, for the reasons of the countries are very big. We're in a big country. Places that's geographically bounded probably is different from the other areas. The Midwest has its own belief, to the west, to the East Coast. So this one is probably less accurate since Hofstede have measured it in terms of the country. However, at some point, some geographical boundary or some boundary is needed. So this one is a very difficult fix for Hofstede. The second criticism is that the study conducted by Hofstede has been culturally bound, meaning the study was conducted mainly in the US context. Although we know US is a melting pot, it probably represents more culture than any other countries. However, this can still bring criticism. And this criticisms have been addressed, the second bullet point here, because Hofstede now conducts a study not just in the US, because in the 70s, the study was conducted in IBM inside the US by having employees represented in our own ethnic group. However, now the study is conducted all over the world. And the third criticism is about the industry bias, and this one has also been addressed by expanding to general public's views and belief for culture. And the last one, but not least, is culture is not a static concept, but if Hofstede treated this as a one-time shot, and if it possibly refer to it as that's not going to change so much. So culture is a very slowly changing concept compared to economic trends. However, right now, Hofstede study is also evolving, it's dynamic. So it surveys every couple of years. So 2020, 2012 have a survey, 2015 has a survey. So this criticism has been addressed as well. What is considered the merit of Hofstede model? So this one is relatively easier to answer. The merit of Hofstede is was the first management scholar to measure culture. We have talking about culture, and if you go into the library, if you go into any of the anthropology studies, culture is usually a book that they'll tell you folklore stories to help you feel about it, immerse you into the environment, future. So those are the ways to study culture before Hofstede. But Hofstede want to generalize this concept of culture, have everybody have a role to play in understanding culture. So he measured the culture with the numeric numbers, rather having everybody read those long tails in order to understand culture. And certainly, the thing that's not last but not least for the merit of Hofstede is the Hofstede dimension is widely used in management to infer for management practice. So his work bringing anthropology to a theoretical philosophy level to a practice level. So that's another contribution of Hofstede. Hofstede dimension have three different levels. So this one, when it was first created, there are four. These fours are, it's possible in the slide. Let me see whether I can remember all of them. So we have first talked about individualism versus collectivism. So that's one dimension. We have talked about feminism versus masculinity. And we have long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. We have uncertainty avoidance. So these four are the original four. As time goes by, Hofstede have added the power distance index and indulgence versus restraint. If I can correct myself here, I believe long-term versus short-term orientation is on the later side. So the correct order possibly will reflect the ones on the screen right here. So individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus feminism, power distance index, uncertainty avoidance index. Those are the original four. He later on added long-term orientation versus short-term orientation. And the most updated one is indulgence versus restraint. So the scores in each one of the six has a meaning. The higher the number on the left-hand side, it's emphasizing on the left-hand side. For example, the higher score in individualism versus collectivism means the country is more individualistic. If we take this as a power distance index, the higher the number, it means the country people are more tolerant to powers, to distance, that accept that people are born different. The number being higher in uncertainty avoidance index, meaning people are uncomfortable with uncertainty. The number being higher for long-term versus short-term orientation means this society appreciates long-term value, appreciate long-term gains. The number being higher for indulgence versus restraint, meaning the country appreciates indulgence culture than the restraint culture. So each one of these, we want to go back to the slide. It's possibly around slide 28-ish in this week. So each of them has its own meaning. I want to possibly explain the last one a little bit more. The last one is it's newer, so people are less familiar with that. Indulgence versus restraint reflects on the society. Although both society have rules, are the society closely practicing these rules? If the society are closely practicing these rules, then it's a restraint society. If the society doesn't require members inside to closely practice and be conformative to each other or to the rules, then it's an indulgent society. I give the example for Catholic religion. So Central Eastern European countries are restrained society in terms of Catholic culture, Catholic religion. But South America countries are indulgent in terms of how they practice Catholic. And we will observe countries with indulgent culture wouldn't give social punishment or not even, as well as not even legal or formal punishment to society members. But in restrained culture, people will be isolated, people will be punished even with physical punishments. That not necessarily the body, but it could be financial punishment if they doesn't practice a certain rules in the society is generally agreed. Week 5, we have talked about international trade theory. So in this chapter, I have a question on everyone to match the authors and the theories. So we have talked about absolute advantage theory. We have talked about comparative advantage theory. But first, we before all these two, which are free trade advocates, we have talked about a mercantilist view of the mercantilist view. It's a view that is widely shared before the world having Queen Elizabeth I, when the world doesn't have that much international trade activity. So mercantilist view trade as a zero-sum game. But after mercantilist view, when free trade view have entered our world, we have more and more talking about trade is a positive sum game. In the mercantilist view, they view government intervention being positive because governments can help the country to restore their balance of payment, can help the country to restrict imports and help the country to export more. So government intervention is usually on the side of restoring tax, charging tariff, but this is a relatively, in the free trade view, a relatively either isolated or a short-term oriented view on international activities. How does absolute advantage view international trade? Is international trade a zero-sum game, a positive sum game, or a negative sum game? Starting absolute advantage theory of international trade. International trade is viewed as a free trade has benefits. So it's viewed as a positive sum game. So in the first trade theory that we have known that author being absolute advantage theory. The author informed us if the two countries involved in trade, the world's volume of consumption will increase without sacrificing each party for its own consumption, as well as the productivity will not sacrifice either. A positive sum game literally means everybody will benefit. Nobody will lose if the other person will win. And zero-sum game means if somebody wins, the other person will lose. So that's the difference. How do we differentiate zero-sum game versus positive sum game? And the next one is, how does comparative advantage theory challenge absolute advantage theory? In this chapter, we have go over theories after theories. The point that theory keep emerge is that they want to challenge, they find some logic hole in the previous one. Not necessarily the previous ones are not smart, it's because situation at the time that only gives them limited information. When new scenario comes up, there will be a new theory to explain the new phenomenon. So one new phenomenon has emerged in the comparative advantage theory then. It's a situation about countries started to develop unevenly. In the absolute advantage theory, countries are assumed at the same level of productivity. But when we move to comparative advantage theory, some countries are significantly more developed in productivity than others. So our assumption for the trade theory has changed. That we shouldn't assume that each country would take on one product, and this country will be the country that's absolutely in advantage for their productivity rate. So in a way that we can say in the Adam Smith era, which is absolute advantage theory, all the countries are the same for productivity, so nobody is better than the others. We're only focusing on the stuff that we absolutely have an advantage on, and then swap with the other country for the other product. But in the David Ricardo stage, when comparative advantage theory was proposed, that we will enter the era that some countries are already going through industrial revolution. Their productivity rates are much higher. So this country, should the more advanced countries still trade with more laggard countries? So that's the question that changed in the David Ricardo era. So in the last one, we are matching the authors of the theories for this chapter. Absolute advantage is by Adam Smith. Comparative advantage is by David Ricardo. The distribution impact of trade is by Paul Samuelson. For the life cycle theory by Raymond Vernon. The new trade theory is by Paul Krugman, and diamond model is by Michael Porter. So these are the authors that were included in the international trade chapter. In week 6, we have gone through regional economic integration zones. These zones are in the different level of integration. NAFTA is in the earliest or less integrated zone. So if we talk about levels from low to high, NAFTA is the lowest. From this lowest level of free trade areas, we can gradually move up. The next level after free trade area will be custom union. Custom union have one more feature on top of free trade area, which is the countries have agreed tariff to the third country, which in the free trade area, the country doesn't coordinate in terms of how do they react to the third country. Custom common markets is moving to another level above custom union. In common market, firms not only have agreed tariff to the third party, they also allow factors of production to move across border freely. This factor of production includes capital, human labor. They also include intermediate products. So these products, everything move around with as the production factor is free of tariff. The next level of common market will be economic union. European Union since 2000 has reached this level because in the economic union, they have already coordinated their currency. In economic union, they also have shared not just currency regimes, but also economic regimes. These economic regimes, you will think about that how do they approach a certain economic trend? How do they advise countries inside to go forward for emphasis on some economic activity? Economic unions, of course, its major feature here has the currency. The currency signifies these countries are highly coordinated in terms of their physical system as well as their currency system. In the economic union, after currency are coordinated, currency exchange risks to international business are dropped to minimum level. The last level of economic integration for the political union, we have never reached in this level. But it's a level that's in theory that can be done. So we also included that here. We want to match these regions, the trade blocks, to each other level. So NAFTA is in a free trade area. European Union is an economic union. European Free Trade Association is in a free trade area. Mercosur has a common market. Andean Community is a custom union. If we move forward for this table here, this table is discussing about 3 different activities for international trade. How does it affect the balance of payment? Balance of payment has 3 accounts. They are current account, capital account, and then financial account. For all import and export activities, it will be included in the current account. Current account have a surplus if there's more export. The rule of thumb for balance of payment, if you receive a payment, it's always going to be positive. If you pay out something, it will be negative. So this is not too much an argument for current account or capital account. That's very intuitive. The non-intuitive part is for financial account, because it comes by receiving a payment or not. If the US sold the assets, the US will sell the asset to a foreign party. Then US partner party will receive payment. This will mark as a positive. So when US own foreign assets, it will mark as negative. When US assets owned by a foreign agency, it will mark as a positive. So whenever this geography area, which is the country that we are on the focal discussion, receive payment, it will be positive. The last 2 questions on week 6 is how can government intervene in international markets? This intervene, which many talking about their trade intervene. These mechanisms will be this also summarized in the last 20 slides in this week 6. So there's essentially only a couple of different terms. There are tariff. Tariff is one of the interventions. There is voluntary export restraint. There is local content requirements, subsidies. So those are the government ways to intervene in international markets. The reason for intervene is to make the local product popular, and how to restrict imports from other countries. That's the purpose. It's more like a mercantilistic view type of intervention. What are the justifications government are using this intervention? There are 2 reasons government are using it. One is economic reason. The government wants to save jobs. They want to make sure the local people are economically sound, make sure local companies are still able to be self-sufficient. So that's the main reason for economic argument. But there's another argument, and this argument is for policy reasons, for political reasons. So for the political reasons include the diplomatic reasons, the political affinity reasons, countries' political image reasons. So if we're thinking about supporting an infant industry, then this will be grouped into economic reasons. If we're thinking about countries want to a political ally, that will be a political reason. A country would justify its behavior for giving out subsidies for supporting infant industry. That's one of the examples. How do we connect the two questions? The country will consider that it needs to maintain political relationships with any of the country in South Pacific region so that they can protect the public sea, where it's also the geopolitical power. Then it becomes a political reason. In week 7, we have talked about international finance issues, particularly foreign exchange rates. Foreign exchange rates are determined by the value of the currency. However, the rates, the price of the currency are affected by the country's price, by the country's interest rate, by the market psychology, as well as the government intervention. The exchange rate affected by the price, it's reflected in the country's inflation. So here I mentioned an example. If a country has inflation domestically, its currency value will decrease because the currency has less purchase power. If a country's interest rate increase, there will be more hard money coming in and more demand for the domestic currency. Domestic currency value will increase. If market psychology predict this country's currency will increase in value, then this country's currency will increase in value, because when people expect this currency will increase, the demand for the currency will increase. So we can always link this to supply and demand story and predict the price of this currency. If the government intervention manipulates to sell more currencies in the international market for domestic currency demand will decrease, so domestic currency will depreciate. If government interventions to lead to the domestic currency of more demand, for example, they sell more foreign currency to exchange into the domestic currency, then domestic currency demand will increase and domestic currency exchange rate will appreciate. In the next question, we will discuss the currency overvaluation versus undervaluation. What will happen if a currency is overvalued? Overvalued means when it's supposed to be at the ratio of 7 to 1, it was rated higher, so the other currency will lose power against the current currency. When overvalue happens, export price will go up, so export volume will go down. Import volume will go up because foreign products will look cheaper compared to domestic currency. Domestic currency has more purchase power when domestic currency is overvalued. How does it affect inward and outward FDI? When domestic currency is overvalued, because of purchase power increase, domestic currency can afford more foreign assets, so our foreign investment will increase. On the other hand, foreign investors in domestic context will lose purchase power, so the number of assets will decrease for new investments, and inward investment also will decrease. Another effect for currency overvaluation is how does it affect domestic inflation. When foreign currency is when domestic currency is overvalued, that foreign goods will look less expensive. This will help domestic economy to control the overprice and also control the domestic inflation. The assumption here is the foreign goods are usually more expensive, which is commonly the case across different country borders. Foreign products are more expensive owing to this foreign products might have to pay tariff, so it will eventually add up to the final consumer price. Foreign goods are usually better in terms of quality, not because we think that foreign products are always better, because there's a selection bias in here. Any product that's not good possibly have harder time to exit the country border. So whatever that have already gone out have already went through a selection process. We have mentioned in the OLI framework, firms that have comparative advantage usually is more likely to go out. They're more likely to be successfully invest abroad. So better products going through a selection process landed in the host country here. The product has better quality, better design, so it charges higher price. And this is why foreign products tend to have a higher price. Because of that, if domestic price is following the trend of foreign products, then the inflation will keep going if there's more and more foreign product comes in. If foreign product actually looks more expensive compared to domestic product. In the case of currency overvalue, the foreign product will look not as expensive because domestic currency will have a more affordability. So it looks to the domestic currency holder's eye, the foreign product not as priced. So this will help control the trend of domestic products following the price trend of foreign products. It will slow down the trend of inflation. What if a currency is undervalued? If a currency is undervalued, we have given here for the example of Indian rupee, but the conclusion here, if currency is undervalued, we possibly think about in the China's case, for China, how do they deal with export? When currency is undervalued, export becomes less expensive. All right, so let's do this way. Overvalue, we have already gone through in the previous bullet point. So undervalue is the opposite condition. When currency is undervalued, the country is boosting its exports because in the foreigner's eye, price is less expensive. The foreign currency has more purchase power. Export will increase since the domestic product looks less expensive, measured by the foreign currency. Import would decrease because compared to foreign currency, domestic currency has less purchase power. And remember this in the scenario of domestic currency is undervalued. Inward investment will increase because domestic goods measured using domestic currency have decreased in value. But our investment is suppressed because the value of using domestic currency to purchase foreign assets, the purchase power has gone down. That's the study guide 1.